The sun burned high above Arlington National Cemetery as a reverent silence settled over the crowd. Rows of white chairs stretched across the immaculate green, filled with veterans in uniform, grieving families, and members of the press. President Donald Trump stood at the podium, concluding his Memorial Day address. In the third row sat a lone Marine in full dress blues. He stood out, not for attention-seeking, but for his rigid posture and the deep scar cutting down the side of his face. Sergeant Mason Riker, a decorated Marine, a man who had not spoken publicly since returning from his final deployment 2 years earlier. As the president stepped away from the podium and began moving through the crowd, shaking hands and offering quiet thanks, he stopped in front of Mason. The Marine rose. Their eyes met. Without a word, Mason reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Slowly, deliberately, he opened it. Inside lay a tarnished silver star. Behind it was a folded slip of paper bearing a single name written in careful ink, Corporal Eli Morrison. President Trump froze. Cameras stopped clicking. The air thickened with silence. "Son," Trump asked quietly, "what's this?" Mason didn't answer. He simply held the box forward, his hand steady, his expression unreadable. A Secret Service agent stepped closer, but Trump raised a hand and waved him off. He took the box, studying the worn metal. "This isn't new," he murmured. Mason gave one firm nod, then sat back down, arms crossed, lips sealed. Trump turned to an aide. "Find out who Corporal Morrison is." From that moment on, the ceremony was no longer about speeches. It was about a name, a silent Marine, and a story the country had forgotten. Inside the presidential motorcade, Trump kept opening the box, staring at the medal and the name beneath it. The silver star bore scratches and worn edges. It had been through something. "I want a full report tonight," he told his aide, Rachel, "on Corporal Morrison and Sergeant Mason Riker. I want to know what that moment meant." That evening, Trump's meetings were delayed. The medal sat on his desk, demanding attention. For once, he wasn't talking. He was listening. Rachel returned with 2 files. "Corporal Eli Morrison," she said softly, "killed 3 years ago in Afghanistan. Operation Copper Shield. 22 years old. He shielded his squad from a grenade. Saved every man." Trump's brow furrowed. "The Silver Star." "Posthumously approved," Rachel said, "but buried in red tape. Never delivered to the family." "And Riker?" Rachel hesitated. "Same unit. Morrison's commanding officer. Lost half his team. Severe PTSD. Medical discharge. He hasn't spoken since the incident." Trump leaned back slowly. The silence at Arlington finally made sense. "This medal," he said, lifting the box, "isn't a protest. It's a promise." He picked up the phone. "Get me Morrison's family." The call reached a small house in Iowa. "Mrs. Morrison?" Rachel asked gently. "I'm calling from the office of the president. It's about your son, Eli." The woman gasped. "My boy's been gone 3 years. Why now?" "Yesterday," Rachel explained, "the president received Eli's Silver Star from a Marine who served with him, Sergeant Mason Riker." There was a pause. Then, softly, "I remember him. He came to tell me Eli died. Didn't say a word. Just cried and saluted." Rachel swallowed. "The president would like to speak with you." "If it honors my son," the woman said, "then yes." Later that afternoon, President Trump called personally. He said, "I want to apologize that your son never received the honor he earned." "He never wanted medals," Mrs. Morrison replied through tears. "He just wanted to protect his friends." "There's something else," Trump said. "I'd like to award the medal publicly at the White House." She hesitated. "Only if Mason Riker is there." "He will be," Trump promised. Finding Mason wasn't easy. After his discharge, he vanished into rural Kentucky, living off-grid in an old cabin deep in the woods. When Secret Service agents arrived, locals grew uneasy until one neighbor pointed down a dirt road. "His back there," keeps to himself. Mason emerged from the trees carrying firewood, beard thick, eyes wary. "The president wants to see you," an agent said. Mason stiffened. "About Corporal Morrison." Yes. The wood slipped from his arms. After a long silence, he spoke his first words in years. He didn't die for a medal. No, the agent replied. But his mother asked for you. Mason looked away. People forgot him. They are listening now. That night, Mason sat alone on his porch, turning the velvet box in his hands. I told you I'd fix it, brother, he whispered. For the first time in 3 years, he packed a bag. The next morning, Mason stepped onto the White House grounds in full dress blues. The uniform was crisp, but his eyes carried years of weight and loss. Trump greeted him simply. You don't have to say anything. Mason saluted. Trump returned it. On the table between them sat the silver star, polished, gleaming. This medal wasn't lost, Trump said. It was waiting. It was never mine, Mason replied quietly. It was his. Tomorrow, Trump said, you will place it in his mother's hands. That's all I wanted, Mason said. Gray skies hung low over the White House lawn the next day. Flags stood tall. Chairs were aligned. The nation watched. Mason stood beside Mrs. Morrison, her frail hand gripping his tightly. President Trump addressed the crowd. Today, we correct something long overdue. This silver star belongs to a hero who never asked for recognition, Corporal Eli Morrison, who gave his life so others could live. Trump handed the box to Mason. Sergeant Riker, he said, do the honors. With trembling hands, Mason opened the box and placed the medal into Mrs. Morrison's palms. He always said he'd make you proud, he whispered. She wept. Mason stood tall, tears lining his eyes. The crowd rose in applause, not for politics, but for honor. Trump said nothing. He simply nodded. Within hours, the footage spread across the country. Veterans shared it, saying, that's our story, too. Back in his Kentucky cabin, Mason found his mailbox overflowing, letters from Gold Star families, fellow Marines, and strangers who finally understood what sacrifice looks like. For the first time, the burden was no longer his alone. One letter stopped Mason cold. I lost my son 10 years ago. No one ever said his name on television. Thank you for doing what I couldn't. He folded it carefully and placed it back in the envelope. At the White House, Rachel stepped into the Oval Office, tablet in hand. So, she said, you should see this. She turned the screen toward President Trump. A live stream showed dozens of veterans gathered outside a VA hospital, men and women holding medals, dog tags, photographs. Some stood silently. Others wept. They are calling it the Morrison movement, Rachel said. Trump leaned back, stunned, all from one medal. Rachel smiled faintly. Sometimes a name is more powerful than any speech. He nodded slowly. Get Mason back here. I want to ask him something. Mason stood in the rose garden later that afternoon, uncomfortable amid the symmetry and quiet elegance. Trump approached casually, hands in his coat pockets. You never wanted attention, Trump said. I know that. But what you started out there, you helped more people than I ever could. Mason said nothing. I want to offer you something, Trump continued. Not politics, not another medal, a mission. That got Mason's attention. A program for forgotten heroes, Trump said, led by veterans, quiet, purposeful. You be the face, never the voice, if you don't want to be, just a presence. Mason tilted his head. Why me? Because people believe you, Trump replied. Because your silence said what speeches never could. Mason looked toward the flag fluttering above the garden. I'll think about it. No rush, Trump said. Just know, the world is listening now. Days later, Mason appeared unannounced at a VA hospital in Washington. Word spread quickly. Veterans emerged from rooms and hallways just to see him. A Marine in a wheelchair rolled up beside him, sleeves empty. You're the one with the medal, the man said. The quiet guy. Mason nodded. I didn't think anyone cared anymore, the Marine said. But you reminded me we still matter. Others gathered. One handed Mason a unit patch. Another pressed a faded photograph into his hand. Mason didn't speak much. He didn't have to. A doctor pulled him aside later. You've done more in 1 week than years of therapy ever could. That night, Mason whispered, I'm just returning what I owe. And for the first time, he felt something inside begin to mend. President Trump soon ordered something rarely done. A section of Arlington National Cemetery was dedicated to those who never received formal recognition, those who fell without fanfare. At its center stood a stone engraved with simple words. In honor of the names we almost forgot, Mason stood beside Mrs. Morrison, who wore her son's medal on a chain around her neck. There were no long speeches, only names, read aloud by families from across the country. Trump kept his distance, allowing the moment to belong to them. Mason traced Eli's name with his fingers. "You're not forgotten," he whispered. "Never again." Weeks later, Mason was invited to speak at a high school rock program. He didn't want to go, but Rachel insisted. "They need real heroes," she said. Mason wore civilian clothes and kept his head down. The teacher introduced him simply. "This is Sergeant Mason Riker. He doesn't speak much, but his silence changed the country." A student raised her hand. "Do you think being a soldier is worth it?" The room fell silent. Mason didn't hesitate. "It depends what you're fighting for," he said. "I fought for my brothers. Some didn't make it home, but I carry them with me." He paused. "If you fight for the right reasons," he said quietly, "it's always worth it." The room erupted in applause. His voice wasn't loud, but it was back. Back in Kentucky, Mason built a small wooden bench beneath a tree behind his cabin. He carved one name into it. "Eli." He began writing letters to his fallen friend, leaving them there, sometimes just a sentence, sometimes pages. Soon, strangers began to visit, veterans, widows, parents. They left letters too. No one disturbed them. They simply added their own. A community formed, not around speeches, but shared silence. One afternoon, Rachel arrived with a letter of her own. "My brother died in Iraq," she said quietly. "No medal. I joined politics to fix things, but it all felt pointless." She placed the letter beneath a stone. "You helped me remember why I started." Mason met her eyes. "You've done more than most. Don't forget that." It was the first time he offered comfort instead of receiving it. The Silver Star began a nationwide tour, protected behind glass. It wasn't just a medal anymore. It was a symbol. Veterans added names to a growing memorial wall. The wall of the almost forgotten. Mason traveled with it for 1 year. He didn't speak at every stop, but when he did, he always ended the same way. Say their names, even when no one else will. At one event, a protester shouted, "My dad never got a medal either." Mason approached calmly. "What was his name?" "Staff Sergeant Dan Kruger," the man said, shaking. Mason handed him a blank tag. "Write it. I'll carry it." Tears replaced anger. One morning, Mason received a letter from Mrs. Morrison. "You gave me back my son, not just his medal, but his legacy." Inside was a photo of Mason and Eli during training, laughing. On the back, "He loved you like a brother. And so do I." Mason slept through the night for the first time in years. A year later, the wall reached 10,000 names. A candlelight vigil filled the grounds. Mason lit the first candle. When Eli Morrison's name was read, the crowd answered together, "We remember." The Silver Star now rests in a National Museum behind crystal glass. Beside it, a plaque reads, "This medal was handed to a president not for glory, but to remind us that some names fade unless we speak them aloud." This one did not. Years later, a boy stands before the display with his father. "That's the medal I told you about," the man says, "the one that changed everything." "Who gave it to the president?" the boy asks. "Sergeant Mason Riker," the father replies. "He served with Eli, my older brother." The boy unfolds a letter. "Can I leave this here?" His father nods. "He'll hear it." The boy places a letter on a small wooden bench, a replica of the one in Kentucky. Another letter, another name, another reminder. Heroes live on, not in speeches, but in the quiet moments where we choose to remember.